Hello, everyone. I am Minh Sơn from Nanyang Technological University of Singapore, speaking on behalf of my co-authors, Quah from the University of Cambridge and Phan Dung from ICS Yusof Ishak Institute. Today, I'd like to present our paper, Chống Dịch như Chống Giặc, Fighting the Pandemic Like Fighting the Invader, Audience Agency and Historical Resources in Vietnam's Early Securitization of COVID-19, which delves into the Vietnamese state's responses to COVID-19 from January 2020 to June 2021 and its implications on broader securitization theory. As you can see in these pictures of what I typically call or cheekily call COVID-19 agitprop, Vietnam's initial securitization of COVID-19 drew deeply from historical narratives and symbols specific to the Vietnamese experience, particularly during their 30 years of wars. However, their securitization project was not simply top-down and state-driven, but also featured ground-up participation, where the public was mobilized to participate in and actively reiterate securitization practices. The case saw blurred distinction between audience and the securitizing actor and invites deeper thoughts on key debates surrounding securitization theory. Our paper thereby seeks to highlight the shortcomings of the Copenhagen School's model of securitization, and from there develops our notions of historical resources and activation architecture to more adequately explain the processes of securitization. We begin with our intervention into the conceptual debates in securitization theory, particularly regarding the category of the audience and their agency. Securitization theory in its classic incarnation under-theorizes the character of agency the audience possesses, particularly its scope of possible activity. Our characterization of the audience's response is not confined to the category of acceptance, but explores instead the range of mobilization. Our empirical case accounts for public participation in securitizing discourses, which has become increasingly pertinent with the prominence of participatory communication channels like social media, and questions the distinction between the audience and the securitizing actor. This participation also occurs through the interplay with historical narratives specific to Vietnam and allows for greater contact between securitization theory and other areas of research like the politics of memory. With this in mind, we sketch a theoretical vocabulary. Firstly, the depth of historical resources, which we define as the extent and range of shared historical narratives, traditions, and symbols within the society. And secondly, the structure of the activation architecture, which we define as a set of institutions which both develop and utilize the historical resources. Historical resources are first cultivated, then activated by both linguistic and non-linguistic mediums, which can then mobilize society's energies towards a certain goal. The activation of these resources rests upon the institution of activation architecture, which includes educational systems and public communication networks that cultivate shared memories before the securitizing move, and allow for particular agenda setters to subsequently activate the shared memories at the point of securitization. Let us first begin with the historical resources by looking at the structure of the Vietnamese historical condition of insecurity. A constitutive, if not defining element of Vietnamese nationhood is the perception of perennial insecurities that has been embedded through and within official historical narratives and geopolitical concerns. Rooted in anti-colonial nationalism, Vietnamese historical narratives have centered around heroic figures fighting an invader. This invader figure was a literal one throughout decades of wars and gave rise to discursive and institutional structures that respond to needs of wartime mobilization, which persist until today as crucial components of Vietnam's nationhood and state institution. More iconic examples of these include the campaigns against the hunger invader, the illiteracy invader, and the foreign invader, giặc đói, giặc dốt, giặc ngoại xâm, or the loudspeaker system that once blared about incoming enemy aircraft, but now about disasters and emergency propaganda, including Vietnam's endemic avian influenza and now COVID-19. Thus, the invader figure and Vietnam's activation architecture continue after the country's integration into the world economy in the late 1980s, which enable new domains for securitization like public health and the economy. As we will see, Vietnam's responses to COVID-19 saw the full deployment of these historical resources to mobilize society against the COVID-19 invader, giặc COVID, and corresponding application of this messaging by Vietnam society itself. Like many countries, Vietnam employed securitization in its early response to the COVID-19 pandemic and used war metaphors or military language to frame the pandemic as a security threat, thereby justifying extraordinary public health measure. However, Vietnam's securitization efforts stand out for three reasons. Number one, the extensive and consistent use of securitizing acts through various mediums. Two, the incorporation of historical narratives and symbols specific to the Vietnamese experience. And three, the active participation of the public in reinforcing securitization practices. From January 2020 to June 2021, Vietnam went beyond generic warfare metaphors and heavily relied on key themes in officials' Vietnamese history to construct a warlike reality. This approach effectively garners citizens' support for the country's strict COVID-19 related policies, securitized through the slogan of fighting the pandemic like fighting an invader, or Chống Dịch như Chống Giặc. The Vietnamese state and society have constructed discourses such as doctors at the front line, white blouse soldiers, or announced COVID-19 developments in Vietnam through invocations of past military campaigns, such as Vietnam's famous Spring Offensive in 1975 against COVID-19, or employ non-discursive wartime symbols and propaganda tools, such as the abundance of songs, poster, and social media campaigns created by Vietnamese individuals that are later amplified by the state. Such instances cognitively rendered a particularly martial or militarized visage of Vietnam war against COVID-19. There are spontaneous displays of Vietnamese citizens and officials saluting healthcare workers in commemoration of COVID-19 fighters and victims in wartime-like fashion. This sets Vietnam apart from other instances of COVID-19 war metaphor, where there is no comparable degree of resonance in state-public interactions. That the Vietnamese state's actions were successful in containing COVID-19 only compounds their distinctive nature and theoretical utility. This concludes our presentation, and thank you for listening and hopefully reading our paper.